Hello, Boston. I love being in Boston. I love this town. My brother went to school here at Berklee College of Music. His roommate was Steve Vai. I heard amazing musicians yesterday just playing for free out on the street. Musicians like you'd go to a concert hall to hear. Just amazing stuff here. I love coming here, and Boston's great. My favorite Boston joke is in Spinal Tap. This is Spinal Tap. This is Spinal Tap. Any Spinal Tap fans? Okay, so remember when their Boston gig falls through and their manager's trying to console them and he says, it's not much of a college town anyway. Love that. Okay, it's funnier on the movie, but there we go. Okay, so that's Boston, but I live in New York. I took the train up here, and I live in Manhattan. I live in iconic Midtown Manhattan. Like my studio, Happy Hog, A Space Apart, it's right around the corner from, literally right around the corner from the Empire State Building. My daughter sees the UN from her bedroom, and I'm by the East River. But I often have to go to Brooklyn, right? And Brooklyn is where all the creative people are, they say. So, not that I'm bitter. So, I live in Manhattan, they say all the creative people are in Brooklyn. Not that I'm bitter. Anyway, I sometimes have to go there, and there's 3 ways to go to Brooklyn, right? You can definitely, well, let's see, you can take the subway, but if you've seen any movies from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you know that the trains are graffiti-covered hellholes populated by giant alien locusts and tribal warriors. So you probably don't want to do that. And even if that's not true, there are definitely parts of the subway that have never been cleaned. I had a roommate like that in college, but that's another story. So there's the subway, then there's cars. Nobody in New York can afford a car, right? You really can't afford a car. If you could afford a car, you can't get insurance because it's New York. Why would anyone insure your car in New York? So you probably don't want to do that. So, and then the third way is the boat. So this is the East River Ferry. As you might have guessed, it's located on the East River. And it goes between Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens and Governor's Island, and it's awesome. So you get on the boat when it finally arrives, and then you leisurely cruise down the East River under amazing bridges, passing wondrous things, and they've got a bar. So they set up this website pretty nicely. It says East River Ferry, that's the logo, right? East River Ferry, and then in case you missed that, they've got a highlighted You Are Here tab that says East River Ferry. So those are 2 good clues that you've come to the East River Ferry. Of course, you're only going to go there if you're looking for the East River Ferry, and you've Googled East River Ferry. So, you know, pretty reassuring. East River Ferry logo, East River Ferry selected tab, and then they sat around in a committee and came up with a headline, Welcome to the East River Ferry, which is pretty good. It reminds me of the first websites I worked on in the 1990s, where it would say like, welcome to our homepage, please utilize the blue underlined links to navigate our content. It's kind of like that, so that's pretty cool. And then they obviously hired an ad agency to come up with something really creative, which I'm sure the ad agency did, which they killed because they're a client. And then the ad agency probably had lots of edgy, brilliant campaigns that were killed, and eventually they came up with this line, relax, we'll get you there, which means nothing. But I think, who here is a fan of Steve Krug's famous book, Please Make Me Think Really Hard? Right? Please make me think really hard. We know, after all these years making websites, that when users come to a website, they're not busy, they're not distracted, and they read every word on the page. And we know that they not only read every word on the page, but they actually think hard about every word on the page as if it was a Japanese poem. They like to savor all the meaning. I've seen hipsters sit around in coffee shops looking at websites like this, drinking an espresso and just reading each sentence and pondering its deeper meaning. And it was in that spirit that they came up with this headline, obviously, relax, we'll get you there. Because if you think about it long enough, well, if you think about it too long, none of the words make sense anymore and you forget your own name. But if you stop short of that, relax, we'll get you there. They're basically saying, unlike the stressful subway with the giant cockroaches, and unlike the car that's gonna get stolen or get stuck in traffic, relax on the boat. You don't have to drive, you don't have to hold onto your iPod like someone's gonna steal it. You can just relax, and also it subtly implies that they have a bar. right? So we'll get you there actually could have two meanings, right? Depending on your interest. And if you've ever ridden it, they actually do get you there eventually. It takes about like 7 hours to go, across the river to Brooklyn, but by then you don't care. And so those are the two H1 headlines. Welcome to the East River Ferry and relax, we'll get you there. And then there's a third H1 headline because you can't have too many H1 headlines on a homepage. And this is the one that's the most interesting, although you can't read it because they set it in green on a blue background, right? And so here, I'll tell you what it's about. They set up this East River Ferry service and it was so popular and so successful that they couldn't provide the service. Too many people wanted it and they were giving it free. The mayor said, it would be nice if we just gave the ferry service free. And then everyone would find out about the ferry service. And they did, and they couldn't make enough ferries. They couldn't drive enough ferries. There weren't enough seats on the ferry. So they decided to put a warning on the website telling you not under any circumstances to try to get the East River Ferry. So they wrote, in all caps, which is internet screaming, right? Updated service advisory, East River Ferry capacity limits, click here to read, which, as my friend Jared Spool often points out, could be worse. It could be click here to read more. So click here to read. But then they didn't want that to seem too traumatic, so they put it in screaming caps so you'd notice it. Then they set it in green on blue so you couldn't read it because they didn't want it to, ruin the mood of the page. And then, because you couldn't read it and it didn't seem to be about anything, they put a big yellow alert button next to it to make sure you wouldn't miss it. So there's schizophrenia right in that thing, right? It's screaming, but it's invisible, but it's got a big yellow warning sticker next to it. And so developers in the House, God bless you, but this is developers' work, not designers' work. This is a committee yelling at a developer, right? Whoever designed this page didn't come up with this, right? This isn't the same person who designed the page or the same team that designed the page didn't say, we're gonna make this banner no one can read in all caps and stick it there, because that doesn't make any sense. So this is a content problem that was not foreseen when they put the website together. They didn't think about contingencies. Any 37 Signals fans in the house? 37 Signals had a book called Contingency Design a few years ago. The idea that a website is a living presence and that a user may want to do several things, not just the thing you envisioned, and that the website should be able to meet the user's needs, not just sit there like a static brochure. That didn't occur to the people who put this website together. And because they didn't think about the content, because they didn't think about the contingency, and it's New York. There could be a terror alert, the East River could freeze. There could be lots of reasons that you'd need to have different messaging on the homepage. So if you're making a website and you only have one message on the homepage and you've spent 6 months in committees coming up with welcome to this and then a headline that says the same thing, you're probably not thinking about contingencies. You're not thinking about your website as a living entity. You're not thinking about your users as beings that are actually using it. You're thinking of it as if it's a brochure that gets slidden under someone's door. Write once and never think about again, right? And that's a mistake because content, turns out, is a design problem. And everyone in this room is a designer, even if you're primarily a developer. If you're primarily a developer, you still shave 6 lines of code to make the experience slightly faster for the user. You're still designing user experiences. Everyone in this room is designing user experiences. The seriousness with which we take our profession, whatever title we happen to have, and the amount of time we spend trying to be better at our craft is about, it's not about so we get a gold star, it's about making a better experience for the end user, whether that means it loads faster over their 3G network or whatever it means. Content is a design problem, and yet, strangely enough, our designs are often hostile to content. This is Roger Ebert's website. Any Roger Ebert fans? Okay, Roger Ebert, great, very heroic guy, by the way, like cancer survivor. But he reminds me of my ex-father-in-law, which I mean in a good way. He's like a really smart guy and has kind of a reliable Midwestern sense of truth. He was the film critic that discovered Martin Scorsese. Like on Scorsese's first film, he became an immediate fan. And if you've seen the first film, I don't even mean Mean Streets, I mean the one he made before that, Who's That Knocking on My Door? You have to be pretty brilliant to have realized Scorsese was going to do something, because that film is, a little bit mixed, but great guy. And so imagine, if you will, join me in this wild fantasy. Pretend you've got a device in your hand. I don't know, a phone, say, with a web browser, or maybe an app like IMDb, Internet Movie Database. And let's say you're reading about a movie, and it says, read what the critics have to say, and you click a link. And if it's an app, it might say, warning, you will leave the app and go to the web. Some apps still do that for some reason. Just is so weird to me, like, uh-oh, it's the internet. Okay, so imagine that you've done this, and now you're on this web page where you've come to read Roger Ebert's, because he's reliably Roger Ebert. So even if you don't like his reviews, if he hates something, you might like it. However you use him, he's very reliable litmus. So you're going to check him out first, and you get taken to this page. Remember, you're on your phone. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's not even bring the phone into it. You're just on a desktop computer. Where's the content that you came to see? I'll give you a clue. That's it at the bottom of the screen. That's the content you came to see. Right? So what's the other junk? What's all that other stuff? Well, there's lots of navigation, and there's lots of backlinks and side links. It might be that someone sold them an SEO bill of goods, right? Search engine optimization bill of goods, and said, listen, if you really want Google to find your page, you got to have lots of links on it. That could be the reason there's all that crap on there. Or it could be that the owners of the company, a newspaper, I don't know who works on newspapers, who's done design work on a newspaper client. Okay, they can be tough because you may have 16 editors to please who don't particularly know that much about the web, but have very strong opinions about what they want and what they feel a newspaper is. And they might have said, we need all this stuff because the user has to be able to find all this other stuff in the newspaper. As if I didn't come here to read Roger Ebert's review, I came here to use this newspaper. I just happen to be reading Roger Ebert, but then I'm going to go check the classifieds or about cars, right? So there's all that stuff, which that's an editor's use case, but that's not a real use case. I'm actually used Google or an app to find this page, and I'm never going to do anything else in this newspaper but read this, right? Or they might have, there's a theory called the, actually I think Jared's going to talk about it later, so I won't spend too much time, but there's a theory called the scent of information, which basically says that we are hunters and that we will keep hunting as long as there's a scent, right? Our primitive ancestors would go, they wanted to kill a deer, they would sniff around for deer urine. They'd go into the woods, and if they smelled a little deer urine, they'd keep going for like 7 days. They didn't care how much they suffered until they found that deer and killed it. That's how we ate back in the day, and we're still biologically wired that way. And only now we do it on the web. So they used to say, remember the 3-click rule? If the user can't find it in 3 clicks, they won't. And that turns out to be wrong. It turns out that if you smell deer urine, you'll keep going. As long as you feel that you're on the right trail of what you came for, you will keep going, right? So that's the scent of information theory, and this is a misapplication of that theory. This dumping of links is a misapplication of that theory, but this was very popular. I remember attending a conference where one of the other speakers was saying, put as many links as possible on the page. I don't even think she knew why she was saying that. She just heard that was a good thing to do, and she was advising all the attendees. So this is a common thing, not necessarily a good thing. Again, here's the content I actually came for. Arguably, I also wanted to see the picture of the elephant in case I don't know what an elephant looks like. Okay, fortunately, this is Marco Arament's Instapaper. Has anyone heard of Instapaper or any users of Instapaper? Now, it's quite a few, okay? And if you haven't, Instapaper is an orbital content app, one of the first, maybe the first orbital content app. The theory of orbital content put forward by Cameron Cozen in A List Apart states that users are coming to get your content regardless of how you present it to them, and users are doing with your content what they want to, and they're reading it when they want to in the format they want to read it. That's what's happening. That's what's happening with ebooks. That's what's happening all over the place. That's what's happening with web content too. And that's the challenge for designers that we're going to talk about today. Marco used to ride a train, and he would ride a train to work, and there was no Wi-Fi during this period. And he wanted to read the web because he had this commute, like 30-minute commute every day, but he couldn't read the web because all the articles he wanted to read on the web required an internet connection. So he, being a developer, made this app that basically scraped the web content. If you linked to something, If you liked something, it would scrape all the content and dump it to your computer, dump it to your device, and you could read it later. And while he was at it, he decided to only scrape the part of the content you actually wanted. All the stuff, the stuff that on Roger Ebert's page, that little box. Scrape that and format it for reading and leave all the other junk out, right? Leave out the navigation, leave out the ads, leave out the 17 layers of whatever, okay? This is readability, which came afterwards, and does much the same thing. Readability has a focus on the act of reading. They tried as an experiment to find another way to finance authors of content because ads aren't working and paywalls aren't working, so they tried to make it that if you liked a page, you would contribute some money automatically without thinking about it to the person who wrote the page. Didn't work out, and they got a lot of flack for it, which I still don't quite understand. But readability, leaving that part of it aside, leaving the who pays for content issue aside, what readability was about, like Instapaper, is about reformatting the content so a user can read it, and they can read it whether or not they have an internet connection. Okay? So what happens is, and there are millions of people using readability, and there are millions of people using Instapaper. Now there are, I don't know, 1 billion people using the internet, so millions is still small, but Facebook was once some college students, right? This is the future. This is happening now. Twitter was for several years just some geeks who went to South by Southwest, and now everybody uses it. Moms on Twitter? Anybody got a mom on Twitter? No? Okay. 1, 2, okay. It'll happen. If not, it'll happen with your kids. Your kids will say, my mom's on Twitter, right? That's what's going on. Okay. So if users can scrape our content and put it in a format they like, what are we doing as designers if we're not controlling the visual experience? Actually, we never really entirely were controlling the visual experience. We thought we were, but this was what my friend Jeremy Keith calls a consensual hallucination. We all agreed that everything was 600 by 400, and then we all agreed everything was 800 by 600. Then we all agreed everything was 1024, so we'd use a 960 pixel grid. Is any of this sounding familiar to you guys? We all agreed that there was a 16-point default setting, and therefore we'd use M's to control the size up or down, and that would be perfectly accessible because users don't really touch the preferences. We all agreed users don't touch the preferences. We all agreed we're not going to support Netscape 4 anymore. We're not going to support IE5 anymore. We're not going to support IE6 anymore. Whatever we agreed to not support anymore, it was as if it had never existed, as if there was no one in Africa still using that, as if there was no one with a slow connection still using that, as if there was no one with a disability using a screen reader. Whatever we decided, we acted like we had control, and our bosses wanted that. The whole time I've been a web designer, there's been this struggle between what John Alsop calls the ebb and flow of the web, as it naturally is, and what our bosses want. Our bosses want the same control, and our clients want the same control they enjoy in other media. If they make a commercial, they have absolute pixel control over that commercial. If they make a brochure and the color comes out a little funny, they will threaten the printing company and say, you rerun this. It's a little too magenta. Right? So that's what they expect of the web. And the problem is the web doesn't work that way, and it never really did. This is the New York Times. This design of the New York Times was led. This is several years old. It was led, it's one of the most successful redesigns in history, in web history, and it was led by Karen McGrane, one of our speakers, who will be speaking later on today. And it's a great redesign, and every time I've had a newspaper assignment, I always look to this immediately as a model. Like, how can we do this? This is a great redesign, and it works beautifully unless the user has a problem, a specific problem that overrides it. All the user has to say is, I'm visually impaired, I have low vision, so everything must be 24 points or higher, right? Nothing smaller than 24 points, no matter what. They set that one preference. It's a checkbox. This doesn't take a lot of technical expertise to do. This is something that your uncle could do. Open the browser, hit the checkbox, make the type bigger, And now the design kind of falls apart. It would be very difficult to read this, right? Because these columns weren't made to hold one word at a time, per line. They were made to hold a number of words per line. Does anyone recognize this web page? This is Wikipedia. Same user, same problem, same font size, but strangely enough, doesn't look so bad. Well, it doesn't look any worse than Wikipedia usually looks. Okay, why is it that this undesigned site, this barely designed site, looks fine with big type, and the very elegantly, compactly designed New York Times doesn't? Well, I just answered my own question, right? New York Times doesn't work because it's designed for a specific use case or preference use case, which happens to be true in 99.999% of the time, but might not be true some of the time. Wikipedia is almost undesigned. It's designed, but in a very minimal way. As visual design, it's very minimal. There's a lot of design thinking in Wikipedia, but you can't really look at it and go, doesn't come out in the aesthetics, but it's more accommodating of a user preference like this. So how many designers in the house? Primarily designers. Okay, quite a lot. So are we saying your job is finished and the only good design is design that can handle big fonts like this? We're not saying that. Am I standing up here as a designer and saying, I think it's time we all stop trying to control the visual experience? I'm not. We'll all be out of jobs if that's the case. But we have to think about what does controlling the visual experience mean and how much of our job is that? And if this isn't our job, what is? Here's just another quick example. Here is Yahoo, where the user is colorblind and has set the background to purple, and you can see the problem. And if you can't see the problem on that, this is Sean Inman's site. Any Sean Inman fans in the house? Sean Inman is a brilliant front and back end developer, wonderful guy, game developer, awesome guy, awesome wife, is an educator and a web person. They're like the power couple. They're like Tom Cruise. Well, I don't want to say Tom Cruise because that didn't work out so well. But anyway, but this is not too good, right? The purple background, not too good for reading. It might be, I don't know. It might be that this colorblind person actually can read this better, for all I know, this particular kind of colorblindness. My point isn't that the design breaks. My point is that we don't have control. We really don't have the control that we think we do. And there was always someone like Eric Meyer who could create their own style sheet just because they could and set everything to Comic Sans if they wanted to, or more realistically, turn off ads. How many of you have written a style sheet for your browser to turn off ads on Facebook or something like that? Okay. So there's always users that could do this. There were always, but it was a minority use case. People denying us the ability to control the design was a minority use case. It was people who just unfortunately had old computers and browsers, people who had a disability or a special need, or people like Eric Meyer. Hi, Eric. Anyway, now it's not true, right? We had this consensual hallucination that we could control the design, but now bypassing our designs is no longer a minority activity. It's no longer just Eric Meyer. It's no longer just someone who's colorblind. It's everybody. It's everybody using Instapaper and readability, and if they're not using it now, they will be next year. Because consumers are saying we want the content, we don't really care so much about your branding. Or if you really want us to care about your branding and your layout, you better work harder. And that stuff better be really good, and it better be about me somehow. I don't mean me, I mean them, the user. So this big change in our control over design is now being driven by the user's need for content. In which case, designers in the house, what is our job? Well, some people have called themselves user experience people, UX designers, experience designers, and the focus is just on, we're here to serve the customer. I would say, here's a better definition of design for now. Design for the web is to connect the right user with the right content at the right time. Driven by the user's need, the purpose of a designer, the role of a designer, is to connect the right user with the right content at the right time, regardless of what discipline you have. That's really the job. Okay? That's true with apps too. Let's back up a step and look at some negative examples. This is, anyone work at Bebo? Anyone heard of Bebo? Hi. I gave a version of this talk a couple of days ago in New York, and sitting right in the front row was someone who had worked at Bebo. So I asked her name, and then I told her name to everyone. And then I told the whole audience it wasn't her fault, and that she'd be available for questions at the end of my talk. So Bebo was a startup, a social, some kind of social thing, but that's not what it's known for. It's not known for what promise it had. It's known for spamming its users. What happened was, you'd get an email seemingly from your friend. I'd get an email from Whitney Hess, let's say, and it would say, Jeffrey, I'm using Bebo and it's fantastic. You should join me there. It's really fun. I go, well, I love my friend Whitney. I'll try it, sure. I'd click the link, and it would say, hey, you're just about to sign up for Bebo. Would you like to make it available to your friends? Still don't know what it is, but my friend wrote to me about it. Sure, I belong to Facebook. I have friends. I do have friends. I belong to Facebook. Anyway, sure, I like friends. I like people. I'm a people person. Sure, I hit a checkbox. The next thing I know, the app has gone to my address book and spammed everyone in it with a letter signed by me, sent from my account, saying, hi, Joe, it's Jeffrey. I'm on this thing called Bebo, and it's really awesome. You should try it. And people are going, well, if Jeffrey Zeldman says it's awesome, it must be, right? And you see how that works. Everyone who gets the letter thinks, well, if my friend recommends it, and they all do this. So Bebo became synonymous with user spamming because, and the reason they did it, maybe they needed another round of financing for their startup, and maybe they were told by a venture capitalist, you're not going to, unless you have 100 million users tomorrow, you're not going to get the money. So they said, how can we get 100 million users tomorrow? And this is the way they did it. The problem is they don't really have 100 million users. They have 100 million people who are never going to use the site again, is what they got. Because it doesn't work. It works in the short term. They got 100 million users. In the long term, your name is mud. Your name is synonymous with spam. Bad idea. Hurting users is a bad idea. It's always a bad idea. When your boss or your client tells you, we just have to do this, we just need more eyeballs, we just need whatever, you have the ammunition and you have permission. You've always had permission to say, not sure that's a good idea. I think it could come back to hurt us. You can't say it's a bad idea because it's immoral and we care about other people, because that's not going to fly with a boss or client. But if you say it's a bad idea, it might hurt the company, that's something they might listen to. Another example, I love this one. How many of you have a father or a mother? Come on, this guy's never going to raise his hand. Sir, I am really sorry to hear that. Okay, I want you to think about your gray-haired mother sitting by the fire, knitting you a shawl. You never call her. You're really a bad kid. How many called their fathers on Father's Day? Okay, good. So I'm going to think about my father. My mom's dead. My father's still with us, and my dad's an engineer. He's definitely getting on. I mean, he's the kind of senior that takes lessons on how to use an iPhone. Right? You go to the Apple store, and there's babies using the iPhone intuitively, right? It's just like they just speak that language. And then there's old people learning how to use it because they don't know how to use a completely natural interface. If it's not command line driven, they just can't get with it. Okay, so my dad's pretty with it technology-wise. He was an engineer. He built robots and rocket parts some time ago. Recently, when I was quite young. Anyway, so I'm going to imagine my dad comes to this page and he wants to download this thing, and I'm just going to ask myself what button he would push. He might push that blue recommended download button that's right at the top of the page. That looks like a pretty safe bet. Or he might use the download now button, also blue with the 5 gold stars on it. Or he might, and this page is actually animated. This is a still of it, so you can't do it. The little red devil penis at the bottom actually goes like this. right? On the download now thing, the little red devil penis goes like this. So he might have, for some reason, my dad might have gone there. And it does say download now as well. It's not just the little red thing. He might have done that. And all those would be wrong, of course, because as any of us informed people can tell you, well, the correct link is the tiny link that says external mirror, zip, right? If you click external mirror zip, you'll get the file that's being touted on every link in this page, every seeming link in this page. If you click anything else, you get an ad. And why do people do that? Because we haven't figured out how to pay for content, and all our content is ad supported, and it doesn't work. So we trick people into clicking our ads. Here's my favorite example of that. Anyone work at ZDNet? I'm not seeing the hands if they are. Okay, so we're safe. So at the top, we see what appears to be a headline, except we know it's an ad because we've been trained over the years to know that anything in big letters at the top of the page is an ad. And it's a very compelling ad. It says up in as little as 6 weeks. And I'd like to be up in as little as 6 weeks, if not sooner. I think we all would. I think we can all agree on that. It'd be good to be up in as little as 6 weeks. And it's for a product called SAP Crumb CRM. And does anyone know what CRM is? That's right, it's an acronym. That's correct. So up in as little as 6 weeks, and then in the top right corner, in the sidebar, there's another ad for SAP Crumb, because you can't have enough SAP Crumb ads, and those are the two key places. We've trained our users over the years never to look at the top and never to look at the top of the sidebar, because those are the two key places we sell to advertisers. And then there's the really exciting subtitle all about Microsoft, which I know everyone wants to tear into articles like that, right? All about Microsoft. But if that, and I like Microsoft as much as the next person, but the actual headline on the page, no more Windows XP preloads allowed on new PCs, actually is some news there, right? But notice that the ad is yellow, and notice that the background of the page is yellow. And that seems like, wow, they're really going the extra mile for their sponsor. They're coloring the background to match the sponsor's ad, or the sponsor colored their, and that's not actually what's happening. It turns out people click in the background of a web page to bring the web browser into focus. Let's say you're in a typical computing situation. You've got Microsoft Word open over here, or Excel or something like that. You've got Photoshop open over there. You've got your code editor over here, and you've got a browser. When you want the browser to be live, you move your mouse, or your finger. You move your mouse over to the web browser, and you click in the background. You don't click in the foreground because you don't want to accidentally click a link. You click in the background. Everyone knows that. Everyone does it. Nobody's conscious of it. Nobody thinks about it, except the bastards who made this page. Because what do you think they did? All that yellow background is a link to an ad for SAP Crumb. So, interestingly, they doubled their page views, but they did not double their sales. They did not double their conversions. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them buy SAP Crumb, right? You can make people look at your ad, even though they didn't want to or intend to, but they're not going to look at it for very long. They're not going to think well of your company, and they're not going to convert them. You're not going to make them a customer. It would have to be a pretty compelling ad, eternal life for $5, for me to stay on that page that you deceive me into looking at, right? Design that does not serve people does not serve business. We all have bosses and clients who've told us to do something because. But I want to, well, we need a million eyeballs. Well, your job depends on it. If you want your salary, if you want your job, you want to keep your job, you're going to do it. I once, before I was in web design, I was in advertising, and I once worked on oh God, I can't say the name of this client. It was the Travelers, and it was the Travelers Insurance, and the agency at the time had a travel, and we were working on a commercial that didn't make any sense. It was like kabuki theater. It was just completely random. And it turned out that we were designing something for 3 stakeholders at the company. Jim really wanted to see a rainbow. Sam, I'm just making this up. It's not really the Travelers. It's the Travelers. Sally really wanted to see the umbrella and someone else wanted Mary Poppins. I don't know, whatever it was. We were doing this thing, and my creative director said, when are we going to care about what the consumer wants? And the account supervisor said, never on this account. Sometimes, to keep an account, you'll do all kinds of evil. You'll be asked to do all kinds of evil, and this is the way you push back. In the long run, this will hurt our business. So that's the negative stuff. That's what we don't want to do, and this is how we fight against it. What do we want to do? Well, good web design starts with content. In fact, content precedes design. I love this. Design in the absence of content is not design, it's decoration. Design in the absence of content is not design, it's decoration. If you've ever gotten a design job and before you know anything about the product, you've started thinking, I'm going to do diagonal lines on this one, or rounded corners, here I come, or I'm going to try that new CSS3 trick, you're not really doing design. You're thinking about stylistic flourishes, but you're not thinking about design. You're not solving a user problem. You're not connecting the right user to the right content at the right time. It's not what you're doing style. Style is part of design, but it can't be all of design. Some people are so good with their style that they keep getting work, but everything they design looks the same. That's their signature style. That's okay, but that's not what we mean when we talk about design, and especially on the web. As an example of how hard this is to do, I once had a project to help redesign Blogger. Does anyone remember Blogger? It still exists, actually, so I probably shouldn't have said it that way. You know what I mean. So Blogger was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first blogging tools. When HTML came out and I became a web designer, I was like, everybody's going to do this. It's so easy to learn HTML. But I was wrong. Turns out people in this room think it's easy and everyone wanted to do it, but everyone else really wasn't interested. But once blogging tools came out, then anybody could publish on the web, and the promise of the web started to be fulfilled, right? With tools like movable type and Automatic's WordPress, tools like that, the promise of the web started to be fulfilled. Now, Blogger was created by Ev, who later went on to form Twitter, and Megnut, who later went on to write a cooking blog, and other people. There's like an all-star cast, like Matt Howey, who went on to form Metafilter. Like basically, anybody who worked on this project is a web demigod. It's like amazing what they've all had these astounding careers. But Blogger was very popular and very successful, so Google bought it. And Google bought it and then immediately wanted to change it. So it's kind of like marriage. I love you, you're perfect, let me change you. Google comes in and says, we really love what you've done with this product. Wow, a lot of happily married people who don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, that's good. That's good. God bless. There's more coffee outside, folks. Okay. I love you, I want to change you. Google wanted to change them. They love them, they're successful, they want to change them. So Google comes along, wants to change them, and they hired Adaptive Path, Jeff Veen's company before he made Typekit and 7 other things. They hired Adaptive Path to do UX work and rethink, like make sign up even easier. Sign up's good, make it even better. Make it even easier to post an entry. It already works very well. There's 200 million users. We want 1 billion users. Make it even easier. So Adaptive Path says, great, and while we're at it, we'll do a facelift. They hire a company called Stop Design, which is really Douglas Bowman, a San Francisco guy who now works at Twitter as the lead designer. This is weird. It's this weird, like you get the feeling sometimes there's like 4 of these people, and they just keep dancing with each other. Anyway, they hired Doug, so Doug reached out to Dan Cederholm, Ethan Marcotte, Dan Rubin, me, several other, Todd Dominy, and said, folks, and this was early in the web standards struggle years, said, folks, Adaptive Path is letting me redo the templates in standards compliant valid XHTML. And I want your help coming up with templates. If we all make, I want your help coming up with designs in CSS. If we all make several designs and Google buys it, which they already bought it, instead of there being 3 standards compliant sites on the web, as there are now, there will be 200 million and 3. That'll be pretty good. So that was a pretty irresistible pitch for standards-loving standards evangelists like us. And the money was pathetic, and everyone, never work for cheap money, never work for low money. It's very bad, don't do it. I did it, we all did it, because we were gonna put web standards compliant templates out on the web. We were very excited, and it was Google. How can you say no to Google? Right, it would be like saying no to the Nazis in Casablanca. You can't, that was a weird, I didn't mean that at all. I love Google. I have at least 17 Google products in my body right now. Google's fantastic. Okay. So we all had to come up with these templates that would work for any blogging situation. And that turns out to be very, very difficult. My templates were called Moto, Son of Moto, and Ms. Moto. And I got some grief from some women because Ms. Moto was pink, and women aren't pink. And I will never make that mistake again. But that was the only feedback I got on my design, which was pretty sad. Like, you suck. Pink, Ms. Moto, sexist idiot. Do you like to drop shadow? Sad. This is Todd Domini's design. This is actually, we work in sand, right? We are Ozymandias. Everything we do on the web is immediately destroyed. It's like we're building sand castles in hurricane season. I mean, we make something, it's awesome. As we're handing it to the client, they're changing it. No sooner does the client have it, than the client's out of business. Everything we do is impermanent. So this is not Todd Domini's layout, but it's as close as I could come to finding a living example of it. The user had adapted it some. So Todd had a very subtle background pattern. They replaced it with this one, which looks kind of like a rug at a sample sale. And I don't believe Todd had the little angel. Yeah, what do we have here? We have a little space baby, and we have a fairy with pink cake. I think the user put that in. I don't think that was Todd's work. But basically, you get the gist of it. And you know, and what he did what he could. He made a nicely proportioned, you know, content column to sidebar. He worked with type to the best that you could back then. CSS was supported back then, but not all that well, so there's a lot of things you couldn't do. There's a lot of refinements we do now in type that make stuff like this look kind of amateurish or bad, but this was brilliant in its time. It was brilliant in its time. It's just, you know, this is 2002. It was very hard to have any kind of absolute control over these things, so a lot of times we didn't try. This is the one design that worked and got used by like almost every blogger user, right? This is one of many designs that didn't get used very much because it was too specific, had too much style, had too much character. Doug Bowman also did ones that had character, like that middle one, lots of flavor and character. Those didn't get picked up. People didn't really want the website to have more character than their writing, oddly enough. But this one, this is called Minima, and the story behind it is simple. When the whole job was done, and we'd all way over-delivered, way beyond what we'd promised to deliver, and Google was just sitting there counting their money and laughing, and taking the little neck cork out of the, did anyone see Dune? Remember that scene with Sting? And anyway, I'm just saying, when all that was done, Google said, since you've over-delivered and done such a great job, we'd like you to give us a freebie, just throw in one more. And Doug Bowman said, okay, but he didn't really want to spend a lot of time on it because it's a freebie. So he banged this out, and it's been used by 200 million people. It's the most successful web design in history. It's called Minima. Again, by today's standards, in terms of typographic control, there's things you would do differently. There's a lot of space between them paragraphs, right? And the type, you'd probably want the type a little bigger. Monitors had lower resolution back then, so this looks a little dinky, and there's a lot of little problems, little ways you could critique it, but it's pretty damn good, even today. And this is, I used it. This was the best thing, I mean, what more could I say for another designer? I didn't use my own template when I had a blogger blog. I used his. I mean, that's a way of saying, you nailed it. Nice work, sir. Those are elephants on 34th Street. Once a year, Barnum and Bailey Circus comes to town, and the elephants and giraffes, all that stuff, all the animals walk down one of the busiest streets in Midtown Manhattan at 2 in the morning. It's pretty crazy. So one night at 2 in the morning, I ran down there with my camera, took this picture, put it up on my Blogger blog and said, this is so completely surreal and Fellini-esque. And the first comment was, I'd like to point out that there's nothing dreamlike about being held in captivity and beaten into performing stupid tricks. Wake up, man. And it goes on from there. It's weird, that gentleman wrote to me 2 days ago after, like this is 10 years old, right? That gentleman just, and I thanked him because he actually enlightened me, and I don't take my daughter to the circus, and I found out about animal rights I give to animal, this is basically the story of how many stupid, insensitive things I've done and how people have enlightened me. But anyway, at the time, it was just like, it's 2 in the morning, dude. I just saw an elephant on my street. I thought it was weird. Come on. I'm not torturing elephants. I just thought it was a little weird to see an elephant outside of Duane Reade. CVS were better. Okay, and this is John Slayton's web blog using the same thing. John Slayton was an accessibility pioneer. He is a man who he was a professor of English at the University of Texas, and in his 30s, he became blind. Born sighted, became blind. So if that was me, I would have ended up in a ditch with a needle in my arm, crying on top of a bunch of pizza boxes. But that's not what he did. He became an accessibility expert, and he convinced the University of Texas that the web should be in the English department because it was the platform for communication, and English is about communication. So he got a great kick-ass web program started, while blind, got a great kick-ass web program started at UT years before other universities were even thinking about the web, and spawned a giant accessibility industry in Austin, Texas, of which Nobility is a well-known company that spun right out of there. So he had this great legacy. And then he got leukemia. And he beat leukemia, and he wrote about his experiences here, and he went all over the world on a speaking tour talking about accessibility, and married, great guy, great life, and then he got leukemia again and he died. So this is my friend, John Slayton. This is his website. This is a really horrible story. It's really unfair. It's really sad. But that layout works for his story about his struggle against leukemia, and it also works for my argument about an elephant on 34th Street. And that's the point. This is the exception that proves the rule. This is the kind of layout that is a universal copy container, a universal text container. And this is the example that proves how hard it is to design in the absence of content. Even if you do newspaper design, you say, well, what about newspapers? I don't know what the article's going to be, but you know the kinds of content you're going to have. You may not know who we're going to be at war with, but you know that there's going to be war. You may not know which politician's going to be involved in a scandal, but you know what kind of stuff's going to be in the paper. This is really hard. You don't know what people are going to write about. And this works brilliantly. And this is the Mount Everest of web design, in my opinion. Now, serving the public means good experience for everyone, and that means the days with best viewed with are over. Does anyone remember best viewed with? First site I worked on and said, get a life, get Netscape 1.1. Right? Okay. The days of best viewed with are over, except in the state of Florida. Anyone from the great state of Florida? So Florida is a wonderful place, but they have hurricanes, locusts, death of the firstborn, lots of bad stuff goes on there. So they made this web page to tell you how to survive. But if you're going to experience the beauty of this web page, you need the right equipment. And it turns out that if you're not using the right version of Microsoft Internet Explorer or Netscape, interestingly, and the latest version of Adobe Acrobat Reader and the latest version of Flash, you're going to die. Which I think is all to the good, because after the waters recede, when the earth is made new again, I don't want someone that was using the wrong version of Netscape to be among the living. I think they should perish. And so does the state of Florida. Can't kill them fast enough. Okay. Generally, we laugh. We know this is wrong now. And we know that the right way to do things is progressive enhancement. And I'm sure most of the people in this room have heard of progressive enhancement, which means good experience for all. It means starting from the ground up, making an experience that works in any HTML device. There's a guy, Grant Hutchinson, who uses the name Splorp. He's been blogging for like, I don't know, 80 years or something. He co-founded Veer. Any Veer fans in the house? Veer, the design people? Veer, fonts, all that stuff, okay. And he always sends me, every website I work on, he always sends it to me on a screenshot from a Newton. He likes to prove that my stuff works in a Newton. And that is web standards in a nutshell. It'll work in anything that supports form fields and paragraph tags and H1s and H2s. Everything else is gravy. You layer up. Steve Champion of the Web Standards Project and Hesketh.com came up with the phrase progressive enhancement in the late 90s or early 2000s, an article for hotwired.com. I think, no, not hotwired.com. That's a travel site now. The Wired site, which was called Hotwired before, anyway. I don't want to get tangled up in that stuff. Progressive enhancement, if you're unfamiliar with it, Aaron Gustafson's written a brilliant book, which he oddly named Adaptive Web Design, which sounds like it's about something else. Anyway, it's a great book. It's self-published. I recommend it heartily. And it starts with, how do I do the simplest thing and have it work for everybody? And how do I do the most advanced, sophisticated jQuery, big boxes, but all that stuff, and still have it work for everybody? That's what the book's about. That's what progressive enhancement's about. Ethan Marcotte is going to be entertaining us a lot over the next few days with dances and songs about responsive web design. So I'm not going to explain what it means, but this is the article where it started in a list apart. And I will show you the first responsive design that was made like 5 minutes after Ethan had published his article. This is by John Hicks, who made the Firefox logo and a bunch of other brilliant things on the web. And as you can see, this isn't liquid design. If anyone remembers bad old days of liquid design, which was basically like Wikipedia, it was basically no design. It's still design no matter what the device with. Right, so there it is reconfiguring itself. Here's another quick example. We run a contest, we at an event apart run an annual contest along with the folks from Microsoft's and Microsoft's Mix conference, and it's a contest to see what you can do with 10K. It comes out of the old 5K contest, and basically you've got 10K of code, images, that's it, 10K of code and images to make an awesome app, in this case, web app, and it had to be responsive too to keep it interesting, and so our page was also responsive because you got to eat your own dog food. You can't really, it would be so ironic to have a static layout and ask people to make something responsive in 10K when you had half a gigabyte of stuff and you're still static. So, and the point is not that people sit around and go like this in front of a website. There are people who sit around and go like this in front of a website, but that's a whole different problem. The point is that no matter what device you've got, the layout works. It's about meeting the user more than halfway. It's about finding, again, Ethan will talk about it in much more detail, and it's beautiful, and it's going to keep coming up in all the talks, really. But responsive is one way of addressing mobile and lots of other stuff. And it is a way of meeting the user, serving the right user the right content at the right time, and the right design at the right time. Responsive design is progressive enhancement taken to the next level. And when responsive design first came out, people started arguing and saying, well, you're saying I don't need mobile. I don't need a mobile site. I don't need a mobile app. No, no one was saying that. They were saying in some cases you might not need one. If you've got a content site and you can make it work on a small screen, responsive may be your answer. It may be the answer for everything. If you have a device if you have an app that needs to be geolocation aware and help people do things at a certain, help people check in, responsive design is not going to do that for you. Obviously, you need an app. So, and then the next argument, because it's the internet, people like to argue, people noticed that the first responsive designs had like these gigantic high bandwidth background images, and everyone was forced to download them even if they were just using a little phone. So people started thinking about mobile first. Make the mobile, just like progressive enhancement, make the simple mobile site first, and then layer on the big images. Don't serve them to people who don't have any need for them. Make the mobile experience first, and maybe that means navigation goes to the bottom. And then what starts happening, right? People started asking themselves, well, does this mean that people with desktops want all the crap? I really want Roger Ebert's site, except if I'm on a phone. If I'm on a phone, I want his review. But if I'm on the desktop, I want all those other backlinks and SEO junk? No, I don't. I want the content first no matter what. I came here for the content. That's what I want. So that's the challenge to designers. I came here for the content, and if you don't give it to me, I'll get it from Readability. I'll get it from Instapaper. So in that spirit, I recently did a redesign of my personal site, which has been around almost as long as I have. And I thought it was obvious why I'd done it. I stripped everything except the content, and then I made the type real big. And it's actually a responsive design, but you have to view source to know why. I mean, it actually, the layout never changes. It's like one layout to rule them all, but the type size changes depending on device widths, which is probably the wrong way to do it, but I'm very contrary. And of course, when I published this, the first thing people said was, have you not heard of responsive design? And I was like, yeah, I published it. I've heard of it. I'm just trying something else. I'm kind of doing that too, just in a different way. Because once we all get an idea in our heads, we start marching in lockstep, and that's always scary because, to me, we're supposed to be experimenting and trying things, especially on a personal site. The reason I still have a blog, no matter how busy I get, the reason I have a personal site is so that I can keep experimenting, keep having a playground. For me, this is a playground. For somebody else, playground is like amazing spinning boxes and all kinds of exciting jQuery copying and pasting going on. But for me, it's writing, and people who read my site come to read the writing, so I just put that front and center. And it's an experiment. I made this, is probably too big, but I like it. So here's the thing. Small screen means content first. We're being pressed on both sides. We've got Instapaper and Readability and apps like that, and there's more and more of them, Pockets and other, telling people you can grab the content and not deal with the layout if you don't like it. We got that on one side. And we got mobile, which is now like 50% of the time I'm on the internet, I'm using mobile. And the same is true for everyone in this room, and the same is true for your mom and dad, everybody. The same is true. That's what's happening. You've got mobile squeezing you on one side, Instapaper and Readability on the other side. If we keep designing the way we did, with the same set of delusions that we had, we'll be out of a job. The user wants the content, they're going to get it. We can either design for that and take that into account and make that our priority, the content, the contingencies, the content strategy, or we can be out of a job. Right? So we figured out what's good for mobile, focus on the content, let the user get the content, they don't have a lot of time. The opposite of that Steve Krug book, Make Me Think Real Hard. The opposite of that, the user doesn't have a lot of time, they're busy, they've got things to do. Give them what they want. Turns out that that's good for web design generally. So here's what we talked about today. Content is a design problem. Good web design starts with content, yet our designs are often hostile to content. If our designs don't serve content, users are going to find ways to get it anyway. Mobile and responsive are forcing us to think about content in new ways. Devices are, apps like Readability and Instapaper are forcing us to think about content in new ways. And this is the challenge and the excitement for us now. And over the next 2 days or 3, depending on how long you're staying, that's what we're going to be talking about. So thank you for your time and attention.